Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. Carl Jung. You can be surrounded by people and still feel like a stranger. This is what Carl Jung believed about solitude, social disconnection, and the deep longing to withdraw. But what if your discomfort with visitors isn't a flaw? What if it's not about being rude, antisocial, or too sensitive? What if it's a subtle message from your soul, a quiet signal pointing to something deeper within you? Maybe you felt it, that slight resistance when someone drops by unannounced, that unease when your space is no longer just yours. Or maybe you've been told, directly or indirectly, that your need for solitude is something you need to fix. But Jung had a radically different view, one that might just change the way you see yourself. In this video, we'll dive into the psychology of why you might not like having visitors, not from a place of judgment or surface-level analysis, but from the depth of Jung's insights into the soul. We'll explore the difference between introversion and avoidance, the draining effect of forced interaction, the symbolic role of the visitor in the psyche, and the profound spiritual need for solitude. This isn't about making excuses. It's about understanding who you really are beneath the noise and reclaiming the quiet truth of your inner world. If that speaks to something you felt but couldn't explain, you're not alone. And if you're drawn to deeper self-awareness, soul-level psychology, and the kind of content that values inner growth over surface validation, consider subscribing to the channel. There's much more to explore together. It's easy to misunderstand yourself in a world that constantly rewards noise. When you don't like having visitors or find yourself avoiding social gatherings, the first instinct, especially in a culture obsessed with extroversion, is often guilt. You start wondering, what's wrong with me? But here's the truth. There's a world of difference between introversion as a natural way of being and avoidance as a reaction to fear, trauma, or unresolved anxiety. Carl Jung was one of the first to treat introversion not as a defect, but as a core personality orientation, a fundamental lens through which some people experience life. For the introvert, social interaction isn't painful in itself. It's just energetically expensive. Jung described the introvert as someone whose energy flows inward, someone who seeks meaning before motion, depth before display. So when you don't enjoy people popping in uninvited, or when you hesitate before opening your space to others, it might not be because you're broken. It could be that your psyche is protecting something sacred. Your mental clarity, your emotional space, your inner world. But that doesn't mean we're off the hook. It's important to ask ourselves honestly, is my discomfort with visitors a healthy boundary or a shield I built to avoid something painful? Avoidance often masks itself as introversion. Anxiety whispers, you just like being alone, when really, it's afraid of being seen, afraid of being judged, afraid of not knowing what to say. True introversion feels peaceful, like choosing a book over a party because that's where your spirit breathes. Avoidance feels tense, like choosing silence because your voice feels unsafe. Jung's perspective encourages you not to label yourself too quickly. Look deeper. Pay attention to the texture of your solitude. Is it grounding or is it defensive? Do you feel restored by time alone or merely relieved? These are subtle distinctions, but they reveal so much. And perhaps the most powerful shift is this. When you stop seeing your social resistance as a flaw and start seeing it as a signal, everything changes. The goal isn't to push yourself into situations that drain you just to prove you're normal. It's to understand the reason behind your reaction, to meet it with compassion, not criticism. So next time you feel that resistance rise when someone wants to visit, pause and ask yourself, am I protecting my peace or hiding from connection? That single question can open doors inside you that no one else has the key to. Carl Jung believed that every person carries within them a kind of psychic battery, a reservoir of psychological energy that fuels our ability to think, feel, engage, and connect. Unlike physical energy, which we notice immediately when depleted, psychic energy is more subtle until it's not. You might not realize you're running low until that one visitor overstays their welcome, or a simple conversation leaves you mentally foggy for hours. For introverts in particular, but really for anyone who feels deeply, even ordinary social interactions can feel like overexposure. Not because people are bad, not because conversation is unwelcome, but because the emotional cost is real. Jung saw that some individuals don't just talk to others, they absorb. They pick up on tone, micro-expressions, underlying tensions. They listen not just to what's said, but to what's left unsaid. This kind of attunement makes for a beautiful depth of human understanding, but it comes at a price. That price is energy. So when someone knocks on your door, metaphorically or literally, and you feel your body tense up, not out of dislike, but as a kind of unconscious self-protection, you're not being difficult, you're guarding your internal resources. Because what looks like a short chat to someone else might mean an entire energetic shift for you. Social fatigue is not a weakness, it's a message. It's your system asking for time, space, and recalibration. Jung might say that if you constantly override those signals, if you force yourself to be on when your soul is asking to go inward, you begin to disconnect from your inner truth, and eventually you burn out, not just physically, but existentially. You lose joy, focus, authenticity. The world praises the ability to push through, but Jung's work reminds us that repression always comes with consequences. When your energy is chronically drained, your psyche doesn't just get tired, it begins to fragment. You become scattered, irritable, foggy, not because you're failing at life, but because you're ignoring the rhythm of your own nervous system. The real art is in honoring your limits before they harden into defenses, before solitude becomes isolation, and that begins with small acts of self-honesty, noticing how your body reacts when plans are made, how your breath changes during long interactions, how you recover, or don't, after socializing. These aren't trivial signals, they're your compass, and no one else can read them for you. So if you've ever wondered why having visitors, even ones you love, leaves you emotionally depleted, remember, it doesn't mean you're broken. It probably means you're present. You show up fully, and that fullness takes fuel. Give yourself permission to retreat not out of avoidance, but out of wisdom. Your psychic energy is not infinite. Like any sacred resource, it needs tending, renewal, and boundaries. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Sit still, be quiet, let your soul come back to itself. That's not being antisocial. That's being awake. Sometimes, the discomfort we feel around visitors has very little to do with the person at the door and everything to do with what they awaken within us. In Jungian psychology, the concept of the shadow refers to the parts of ourselves we repress, deny, or can't consciously see. The traits we've pushed into the background because they didn't feel acceptable, safe, or lovable. Jung believed that these shadow elements don't disappear. They simply retreat into the unconscious, where they continue to operate, often indirectly, through projections, reactions, and triggers. So when someone shows up uninvited, or even expected, but still unwanted, it may feel like an ordinary interaction on the surface, but psychologically, something much deeper is happening. The visitor becomes a symbol. Not just a person, but a presence that trespasses into your internal space. For many, this triggers something ancient and unspoken, a memory of times when their boundaries were not respected, when presence meant pressure, or when silence was broken by obligation, not intimacy. You may not even realize it, but the act of someone entering your space, physically or emotionally, can tap into the part of you that still fears intrusion, still braces for performance, still shrinks under the weight of having to host when what you really need is to be left alone. Jung would invite you to look closer. What does the visitor represent in your psyche? Is it just someone dropping by, or is it the embodiment of a deeper dynamic? The pressure to say yes when you mean no, the inherited belief that love must come with sacrifice, or the wound of not feeling allowed to fully own your space, your energy, your time. The tension you feel may not be social awkwardness at all. It might be your unconscious defending its inner sanctuary. For those who grew up in environments where boundaries were weak or ignored, visitors can unconsciously symbolize invasion. Not because the person is aggressive, but because the subconscious remembers a time when you couldn't say no. And now it's trying to protect you from being swallowed again. Other times, the visitor evokes the shoulds. You should be polite. You should be happy to see people. You should be grateful. But the body doesn't lie. And if you listen, you may notice that your tension has nothing to do with rudeness or ingratitude. It has everything to do with self-preservation. Jung didn't see these reactions as overreactions. He saw them as messages. The shadow isn't evil. It's wounded. And every time a visitor crosses a threshold you weren't ready to open, that wound might flare up, not to cause you pain, but to ask for attention. So the question becomes, when someone enters your space, what part of you steps back? What part flinches? What part pretends? If you're present enough to notice these reactions without judgment, you'll begin to see the pattern. Maybe it's the child in you who still fears disappointing others. Maybe it's the adult who's tired of always being on. Or maybe it's the soul simply saying, I need silence more than stimulation. Whatever it is, it's worth listening to. Jung believed that we don't become whole by being perfect. We become whole by bringing the unconscious into awareness, by making peace with our contradictions, and by no longer needing to explain our boundaries to those who don't understand them. So next time someone visits and you feel something shift inside, tightness in your chest, irritation behind your smile, a subtle wish they would leave, don't rush to judge yourself. Pause. Observe. Ask gently, what just got activated? Is it your need for solitude? Your fear of confrontation? Your learned guilt around saying, not now? These aren't flaws. They're clues. And the more you track them, the more you reclaim the parts of you that were once quieted to keep the peace. Because sometimes, the real visitor isn't the one at the door. It's the ghost of all the times you didn't feel safe to say no. And healing begins when you finally welcome that ghost in, not to entertain it, but to release it. Not everyone seeks solitude for the same reason. For some, it's recovery. For others, it's clarity. But for a rare kind of person, the type Carl Jung often wrote about, solitude is not just a preference. It's a spiritual necessity. Jung understood that certain souls are structured in such a way that prolonged exposure to the noise of the outer world begins to cloud their access to something more essential, their higher self, their inner knowing, their personal relationship with the unconscious. To these individuals, being around people too often, even in loving company, can begin to feel like a dilution. Not because the world is bad, but because the self needs space to breathe. Real solitude, Jung suggested, is not withdrawal from life. It's a return to the self. It's a sacred act of integration, a way of realigning with the deeper truths that often get drowned out by conversation, distraction, or constant outward focus. When you consistently don't like having visitors, it might not be social anxiety, trauma, or dysfunction. It might simply be that your psyche is structured to thrive in silence. And there's no shame in that. On the contrary, Jung would say that your soul may be trying to protect its sanctuary, not as an act of fear, but as a form of devotion. Many people feel guilty for needing to be alone. They apologize for declining invitations, feel pressure to be available, or carry a quiet shame for choosing their own company over others. But the truth is, nothing beautiful grows without space. Trees need room for their roots. Fire needs oxygen. And the soul, that most subtle, sensitive part of us, needs silence to speak. In solitude, you hear things you can't hear in noise. You notice subtle emotional shifts, unprocessed thoughts, images from dreams, fragments of intuition, all the ingredients of self-discovery that vanish when the room is too loud. Jung believed that the unconscious is not just a storage space for repressed thoughts, but a living, creative intelligence. And connecting with it often requires distance from the surface world. So, if you find yourself longing for solitude, not occasionally but rhythmically, pay attention. That's not laziness or escapism. That's soul wisdom. It's the deep pull of your psyche asking for time to renew itself. When you honor that, something remarkable happens. Instead of shrinking, you expand. Instead of isolating, you integrate. You begin to operate not just from habit or duty, but from alignment, from presence. And that inner presence is what makes your eventual connection with others so much richer, deeper, and real. Solitude doesn't mean disconnection. It means preparing yourself to connect from a place of authenticity, not exhaustion. So if the world makes you feel guilty for your need to be alone, remember, the greatest minds, the most spiritually awake people, from Jung to mystics, artists, sages, all understood the sacredness of solitude. They didn't fear being alone. They feared losing touch with themselves. You don't have to justify your need for space. You only need to honor it. Give yourself regular windows of intentional, guilt-free solitude. Don't wait for burnout. Choose stillness before stillness chooses you. The soul doesn't scream, it whispers. And it's only in quiet that we can finally hear what it's been saying all along. And so we've reached the end of this journey into the quiet corners of the soul. If there's one truth to hold on to, it's this: not liking visitors isn't always a problem to fix. It might be a message from your inner world, asking for space, silence, or simply the right to be. Carl Jung didn't teach us to be more social. He taught us to be more real. And being real sometimes means recognizing that your energy is sacred and your peace isn't up for negotiation. So, before you force yourself to open the door, ask, what is my soul asking for right now? Maybe it's not more conversation, more gatherings, or more connection. Maybe, just maybe, it's calling for a deeper relationship with yourself. One that isn't built on noise, but on presence, on truth, on quiet moments that no one else sees, but that change everything. So let this be your reminder. Listen to yourself more. Make space for your own inner life. Because Jung believed, and so do I, that your greatest answers will never come from the world outside, but from the still, timeless place within you, that's been waiting to be heard.